Good morning. Thank you all for turning out for our first ABNY Power Breakfast of 2024. Midtown on a Friday. I love a packed room in Midtown and not easy to do on a Friday. Or, as Billy Rudin and Lizzo like to say, it's about damn time. I promise your Friday commute will be well worth it. With us today is one of the most significant and influential leaders in our nation, House Democratic Leader Hakeem Jeffries. And as we're starting, I want to take a moment to recognize some of the elected officials and public servants who are here. I'd ask you to hold your applause till the end. Congressman Gregory Meeks is here. Queensborough President Donovan Richards is here. Assemblymember Tony Simone is here. Councilmember Sean Abreu. Our MTA Chair Jan O'Lieber is here. And our Chancellor from CUNY, Felix Matos Rodriguez, is here. We are grateful for all your service and all that you do, so thank you. So a lot of us know our featured guest today well from back in his years as his time in the State Assembly. Back then, they called him the Barack of Brooklyn. In the chaos that was Albany in the 2000s, Hakeem exuded calm wisdom, integrity, vision, and pragmatism. You couldn't sit down with him for 5 minutes without believing that he was different, he was special, he was going places. That faith in him has proven more than true. That faith in him is paying off enormously for New York and for our nation. The last Congress, where he had risen to the number 3 spot in the House leadership, was one of the most consequential in history. For the first time ever, and this is something we New Yorkers complain about all the time, New York saw more money coming in from Washington than we sent out. The CARES Act, the CHIPS Act, the bipartisan infrastructure law. We're talking about billions of dollars that protected New Yorkers during the pandemic and are now being invested in our economic future. Leader Jeffries, we cannot thank you enough for what you and your colleagues, Majority Leader Schumer and Senator Gillibrand, delivered when we needed you most. So thank you. We can also say, without hesitation, that as leader of the minority in the House, Leader Jeffries continues to work hard and to deliver big. Just last week, his caucus provided the votes needed to keep the government open and prevent a catastrophic shutdown. You got to admit, the current 118th Congress is giving reality TV and the Golden Bachelor a run for its money. But in contrast to all the conflict we see across the aisle, the leadership coups, the brinkmanship, Leader Jeffries is still a bedrock of calm and control. As a New Yorker, I couldn't help being proud after ballot, as the Republican election of a new speaker looked more like a schoolyard brawl, that Leader Jeffries could consistently count time and again on 212 votes, his caucus behind him to a person, time and time again. It is a testament to his leadership and to the trust people across the political spectrum place in him. On a personal note, as a communications person, I just have to say, it's a tough time to be a public servant. It's even tougher to be one who is patient, thoughtful, and pragmatic. We're living in an era where the louder you are on social media, the more attention you get, and the more impactful you seem. It's even harder to lead when tribalism of today's politics makes it easier to pull everything apart instead of trying to bring people together. I mean, how did Matt Gaetz get so much power? So it often feels like we have lost our center. And that's why we're so grateful to you, Leader Jeffries, not only for what you do, but how you do it. So ladies and gentlemen, please give a warm ABNY welcome to Leader Jeffries.
Good morning. Thank you. Thank you, everyone. Good morning. What an honor and a privilege to be back with you, be back home. Stephen, thank you for your leadership, for your very generous and kind words of introduction. all that you do for New York City. Bill, thank you for your friendship and your incredible leadership, the leadership of your family, decade after decade after decade for our great city. So good to see some of my colleagues in government who are here, of course. My big brother in the United States Congress, none other than the Honorable Greg Meeks. So thankful for Greg. We affectionately call him in Washington the King of Queens. So thankful for you, Greg, and of course, our incredible Queensborough President, Donovan Richards. Thank you for being here as well. To all of my colleagues in government, all of the civic and community and business leaders who are here. It's an honor to once again have an opportunity to share a few words. I know that we want to save a lot of time for our conversation, and I also have a train to catch to Washington, D.C., and so I am going to follow the advice of a former Sunday school teacher of mine. Greg knows I grew up in the Cornerstone Baptist Church in Bedford-Stuyvesant. She once said to me, on the question of public speaking, Jeffries, be brief, be bright, and be gone. But let me just share some brief opening observations. Certainly has been an extraordinary Congress. This 118th Congress is an honor and a privilege to serve as House Democratic leader during these challenging and trying times. From the very beginning of this Congress, we as Democrats have made clear that we are going to find common ground whenever and wherever possible with our Republican colleagues on any issue if it will make life better for the American people. But at the same time, we are willing and must stand up to extremism whenever necessary in defense of American values and our democracy. And it's been an extraordinarily turbulent time in America, of course here in the city of New York, dealing with a variety of different challenges, certainly in the United States Congress. We opened the congressional session last January, 15 different votes. I think Greg Meeks never thought he would vote for me that many times, and when you aggregate it, apparently my name was called 3,179 times that first week. I was sick of hearing my name called, y'all. But 15 different votes before the Congress could be organized. And then, of course, we had to work hard to avoid a catastrophic default on our debt in the spring of that year, which would have crashed the economy and perhaps sent us spiraling toward a recession. And then we came back after the August district work period, and the former speaker unilaterally announced an impeachment inquiry against the sitting president of the United States of America. Toward the end of that month, we narrowly averted a government shutdown for the first time on September 30th. A few days after that, there was a successful motion to vacate that was brought, and then we were without a speaker, rudderless, for about 2.5 weeks. In the midst of all of that, the horrific attacks on October 7th, largest loss of Jewish life in a single day since the Holocaust. And of course, that all occurred in the middle of the ongoing brutal war that Putin has launched in Ukraine, largest land war in Europe since 1945. We then narrowly avoided a government shutdown for the second time in November. And then a few weeks after that, a successful expulsion resolution was brought against George Santos. And in thinking about the year, I'm wondering, how did I get myself into this situation? But like any New Yorker, we lean into tackling these challenges, doing it as a team, working on these challenges, of course, with Leader Chuck Schumer on the other side of the Capitol, President Joe Biden, and of course, understanding fundamentally that when you have the privilege of being a public servant, you should expect to have to tackle hard challenges. I remember when I was in Albany, and I was there with Carl Hastie, who was a relatively new member of the Assembly, and Ruben Diaz, and a handful of others, Kareem Kamara, all my good friends. And one of our mentors at the time was the late, great Richard Brodsky. And whenever we would face a tough issue, sometimes we would go to Brodsky and say, how should we be thinking about this question, this difficult question before us? This is rough, figuring out what's the right thing to do. And he would always say to me and others the same thing: kid, this is why we get paid the medium bucks. And so these are tough challenges that are in front of us, but I think we should have some faith in our institutions, in our ability to navigate the challenges. Democrats in particular are proud of the fact that when we had the opportunity to govern with the same narrow margin that the other side of the aisle has right now, we produced one of the most productive Congresses in modern American history. We passed the American Rescue Plan, put shots in arms, money in pockets, kids back in school. When President Biden took office, there were about 2 million people who were vaccinated in this country, and within a relatively short period of time, that went north of 200 million. Saved the economy from a once-in-a-century pandemic that would have otherwise perhaps spiraled us toward a deep recession, and allowed the American economy to emerge as the strongest in the world. We still have challenges. We still have to confront the dynamics related to interest rates or insurance costs, and certainly inflationary pressures. But we've emerged as the strongest economy in the world. We didn't stop there. Stephen mentioned we passed the Infrastructure Investment and Jobs Act, which will create millions of good-paying jobs, including right here in New York City, and help us repair our crumbling bridges, roads, tunnels, airports, our sewer and water systems, our mass transit systems, high-speed internet access in every single community. But we didn't stop there. We passed gun safety legislation for the first time in 30 years that will save lives. Certainly more needs to be done, but it will lay a foundation for tackling the gun violence epidemic in America with the fierce urgency of now. We didn't stop there. We stood up for our veterans, many of whom live in and around New York City, and certainly all across the country, who are suffering from exposure to burn pits and Agent Orange and toxic substances without health care. And because of the PACT Act, another Democratic initiative in the previous Congress, millions of veterans now have access to the health care that they need and deserve to live a life of dignity. But we didn't stop there. We passed the CHIPS and Science Act to bring domestic manufacturing jobs back home to the United States of America, as opposed to our jobs going in the other direction, which had been the pattern for decades. And also made sure that we are investing here in New York City and across the country in the science, technology, engineering, arts, and mathematics education to ensure that our young people have the skills to succeed in the 21st century economy. These are just the highlights, and we topped off this string of incredible legislative success by passing the Inflation Reduction Act, striking a dramatic blow against the climate crisis, setting our planet on a sustainable trajectory forward, lowering energy costs, standing up the clean energy economy, largest investment in combating the climate crisis in the history of the world. The history of the world. And at the same time, strengthening the Affordable Care Act, lowering health care costs, driving down the high price of life-saving prescription drugs for New Yorkers and people all across the country, including taking the price of insulin, which prior to the Inflation Reduction Act would cost the average American family about $4,000 a year, and for millions of Americans is now simply $35 a month. The D in Democrat truly stands for deliver. Stands for deliver, because we run to win, but we win to govern, and we govern to make life better for everyday Americans. And I'll end with this observation and then look forward to our conversation. Never count New York City out. Never count New York City out. Because those who have done so are always on the wrong side of history. Always on the wrong side of history. They counted New York City out during the fiscal crisis in the 1970s. And they were wrong. New York City came back. They counted New York City out in the midst of the crack cocaine epidemic in the 80s into the early 90s, when I grew up in central Brooklyn and came of age. But they were wrong, and New York City came back. They counted New York City out on September 11th when the towers struck, devastated the financial district. These important industries of finance, real estate, and insurance, central to New York's economy, were rattled. But they were wrong, and New York City came back. They counted us out when Superstorm Sandy struck, devastating many of our communities in Brooklyn and Queens and Staten Island and beyond. But they were wrong. We rebuilt, and New York City came back. Certainly counted us out when the Great Recession hit, but New York City came back. And they counted us out during the pandemic. How will cities survive, particularly the greatest city in the world? But New York City came back. They even counted us out when the Brooklyn Dodgers left. But New York City, of course, as we will always do, including in confronting the challenges that we face right now with housing or the economy or work from home or the migrant crisis, never count us out. New York City will always come back. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Leader Jeffries. So I guess maybe I'll start with a question. So we all believe New York is unique and exceptional. And obviously, leader of the Democrats in the House, you, New Yorker, Chuck, New Yorker. Is that weird for everybody else? Like, I know we think it's normal, but is it unusual, or people say, like, you know, you don't quite represent everybody?
Yeah, it's very interesting because Leader Schumer, of course, has been in that position, I think, since the end of 2016, and you know, I more recently ascended to this position. It rarely happens in American political history that you have legislative leaders from the House and the Senate from the same state. I think, as far as we can tell, the last time it occurred in that iteration was in the late 1950s, where Sam Rayburn from Texas was the Speaker, and Lyndon Baines Johnson was the Senate Majority Leader before he went on to become Vice President and President. But you do find different combinations. For instance, in the last Congress, the Speaker of the House, Nancy D'Alessandro Pelosi, who, by the way, I believe will go down as the greatest speaker of all time, greatest speaker of all time. I say that because it ain't easy to follow Michael Jordan, y'all. But we're working as hard as we can to stand on her shoulders. But Speaker Pelosi was from California. Kevin McCarthy, the Republican leader at the same time, was from California. Even right now, you have the top two Republicans from the same state, basically in neighboring congressional districts. Of course, Mike Johnson from Louisiana and Steve Scalise, the number 2 House Republican Majority Leader from Louisiana. But it is particularly unique in that not only are Leader Schumer and I, from the same state, not only are we from the same city, not only are we from the same borough, we basically live in the same neighborhood. But we recognize that our job is to fight, for our communities, fight for our borough, fight for our city, fight for our state, but of course, fight for the nation.
I have a lot of questions about issues and policy, but I want to start really with a personal question. Read that your father recently passed away at the age of 85, and I learned a lot from my dad. Part of it was having a civic tradition, as I know I learned a lot from Bill Rune's dad too, growing up. Can you just tell maybe a story about your dad or something you learned from him that kind of inspires you and takes you in your life and guides you with what you do?
Well, there's certainly so much that my younger brother and I were able to learn from him growing up. He was a, substance abuse social worker, in the middle of the heroin explosion in the 70s, crack cocaine epidemic in the 80s into the early 90s. And to do that type of line of work, you've got to have some resilience. You've got to deeply care about people who are in need, to dedicate your life to that work. And that certainly, I think, is a spirit of public service that was passed down to my younger brother and myself. The other interesting thing, and when your dad passes, you reflect upon a lot of stories, lessons that you've learned. Some, were direct communications, and others were just observation. And, I was thinking about the time in the 1980s where there was this big rivalry, of course, between the Celtics and the Lakers. And, quite honestly, you had much of Black America who rooted for the Lakers, right? Magic Johnson, Kareem Abdul-Jabbar, of course, James Worthy, Showtime Lakers. And then you have much of white America who rooted for the Celtics. Larry Bird and Kevin McHale, Danny Ainge. But my father was a Boston Celtics fan. Now, this is someone who had grew up very proud to be an African American, served, in the Air Force, had been on a journey understanding the context of our own history. And I remember talking to people in high school and others and just casually mentioned, oh, yeah, Dad's rooting I'm rooting for the Lakers. I'm really a Knicks fan, but y'all know how that goes. So I'm looking forward to a good series, but, much of they're doing better now, though, aren't we glad? Aren't we glad? I don't want to get Dolan mad at me. So.
I'm sure he's listening in.
But I'm very proud of how they've done over the last few years. But Dad is rooting for the Celtics. Much of Black America is rooting for the Lakers. Why is that? So one day, I asked him, and I realized that the history of the Boston Celtics was before Larry Bird, before Kevin McHale, before Danny Ainge, was Bill Russell and Casey Jones and Sam Jones. And they were barrier breakers under Red Auerbach. And he never forgot that. and he was loyal to it. Even when the dynamics in the 1980s, popular opinion may have caused him to go in a certain direction, he loved Larry Bird and the Boston Celtics and rooted for them. And that was anchored in this principle of loyalty and history and perspective. And I've never forgotten that.
Thank you. Amazing story. I'd love to talk about immigration. It's been an unusual week, just in that regard with the former president leaning in. But can you just talk about what's a path forward for us on policy of immigration?
Well, certainly we have a broken immigration system, and it needs to be fixed. That's clear. It should be done in a comprehensive way, in a bipartisan way, and in a manner consistent with our values, which I believe are anchored in two principles. One, we are a nation of immigrants. No one should know that better than New York City, and our vibrancy and our history and our journey, but also a nation anchored in the rule of law. And so it's my view that as bipartisan legislation is being negotiated in the Senate, it should be focused, of course, on the pain points in addressing the dynamics, the crisis, the challenges that exist at the southern border, and doing it in a manner consistent with these two important American principles. And I'm cautiously optimistic that the legislation that's being negotiated, the national security package, which of course will include aid for our allies like Ukraine and Israel, our allies in the Indo-Pacific, also humanitarian assistance for Palestinian civilians who are in harm's way through no fault of their own in Gaza, and civilians in other war zones across the world, as well as making decisive progress on the challenges that we confront at the southern border. Now, the House hasn't been directly involved in those negotiations. You know, we have visibility into the conversations as they ebb and flow, but I'm very confident in Leader Schumer's ability to land in a place that makes sense, that will provide substantial relief to New York City and to our surrounding communities, both in terms of financial assistance for the economic burdens that we've been shouldering, consistent with who we are as a city, while at the same time, I think, trying to stem the tide at the southern border in a manner that would make the situation for us and other cities across the country far more manageable sooner rather than later.
Thank you. Another big challenge we're facing is housing, and especially affordable housing. That has, historically, the federal government has played a big role in that. We seem stuck a bit in our city and state. Can you talk about what the federal government could do? I know there's a bill cooking to help move this along.
Well, we are a couple of different things. One, you know, there's a tax package that's being negotiated right now. You know, we'll see it move forward in the Ways and Means Committee in the House the other day. It was a strong bipartisan vote that would do several different things. It would enhance the child tax credit. Doesn't go as far as I think many of us would like in that space, but it would enhance the child tax credit. It leans into enhancing the low-income housing tax credit, very important for the production of housing here in New York City and across the country. It'll do some things on disaster, and then also some business-related tax provisions, including on research and development, the R&D tax credit, and others. So it's a bipartisan bill that's moving that will allow for some progress to be made in the housing space that I think is a recognition of the growing challenge that we confront in America around housing. And whereas it used to be sort of a bi-coastal issue, San Francisco, Los Angeles, New York, Boston, sort of as the centers of it all, what we are finding now is that housing displacement and challenges related to housing affordability are now an issue in many parts of the country. And while that means that it's an issue of national urgency, of growing significance, that also provides an opportunity, for the federal government to get back into the business of housing and affordable housing and incentivizing it using public-private partnerships as best we can to deal with some of the supply and demand challenges.
It's interesting. You talk about that shared interest in housing and shared priority of housing. I think a lot of times as New Yorkers, we think of ourselves as very different than the rest of the country. And somebody who has a powerful and big national role, do you find that as Americans, we have more in common with each other? Or do you find that, and you talk about working from a bipartisan basis, because if you read and watch the news or, I don't know, go on X, it's a very different message that emanates out. Do you feel there's a commonality that drives people towards good policy, or is it like a fight where you just get anything you can?
Well, I think we have to spend more time trying to lean into our shared values and our common interests. And despite a lot of the extremism that we see, dysfunction, chaos, in the Congress, we're still committed to trying to find bipartisan common ground, because, that's the best way to create robust, lasting, sustained public policy. And, to lean into common values whenever possible to drive outcomes that benefit everyone. We are a very big country, a diverse country. That's our strength. But you, of course, have to recognize it. You see it really in the House in terms of how it plays itself out. I remember some members were working out a couple years ago, I guess, with Paul Ryan. Greg, I think, used to be part of this group. And, you talk about family and things of that nature. And it was a conversation that Paul Ryan was referencing the fact that his kids had off in Wisconsin because I think it was the first day of deer hunting season. I'm like, wow, we don't have that holiday in New York. We get off for Rosh Hashanah, right? But so this is an incredible country in terms of its diversity, but that's a strength. And so I think we shouldn't run away from the fact that we're different in many ways. We should acknowledge and embrace that as a competitive strength, while at the same time constantly searching, for the common, values, hopefully democracy and freedom and liberty and opportunity and equality, right, that are core to who we are. And when we do that, watch out, the best is yet to come in the United States of America.
Amen. You recently, in that spirit, delivered votes to keep the government from shutting down and funded. I'd love to just understand about your relationship with, obviously, there's a new speaker. Can you tell us a bit about the new speaker and your relationship? And does the process wherein you delivered that vote, do you think that bodes well for the future for cooperation?
Yeah, every single meaningful thing that has happened, in the 118th Congress, and it hasn't been much, legislatively, under this Republican majority that continues to shrink even as we speak. It's been one of the most unproductive Congresses in American history, based on bills and things that have been moved successfully out of both houses and into law because of the chaos, dysfunction, and extremism we believe, in the House. But we have repeatedly, consistent with that desire to find common ground and do what's right for the American people and put people over politics, when it comes to avoiding a catastrophic default on a debt. 3 times now, we've narrowly averted a government shutdown, providing disaster assistance for Americans who've suffered from extreme weather events. Every single one of those instances, it was Democrats who provided a majority of the votes necessary to get those things done. Why? Because we do truly believe in putting people over politics. when it's consistent with our values and in the best interest of the American people. Some of those things happened when Kevin McCarthy was Speaker. Others, such as averting a government shutdown in November and then doing it again most recently about a week ago, and with leadership from Chuck Schumer working with us, arriving at a top-line spending number agreement that we believe is consistent with the federal government providing for the health, the safety, and the economic well-being of the American people. And so I think with respect to Speaker Johnson, I talked to him about 2 days ago. I'll see him later on in Washington today. He's got a very different view and perspective on a whole host of issues. That's clear. And grew up in a very different environment, in rural conservative Louisiana than I did in central Brooklyn. But I do think what we have seen is at least a recognition, as the Speaker has from time to time said, we may not always be able to get our preferences done, legislatively. It doesn't mean you have to compromise your principles, but we are in divided government. And I think we have at least seen over the last few weeks that there's a recognition in divided government that bipartisan common ground has to necessarily be found. Now, he's got a tough crew on the other side that he has to deal with, and he'll deal with that as best he can, but we'll always be there to find the common ground necessary to do the business of the American people.
Terrific, thank you. I know we have a few questions from out in the audience. Rick Hahn?
My question relates to federal support for the travel infrastructure, but I start by saying thanks to the Biden administration, you and your colleagues in the Congress for the bipartisan infrastructure law. But the air travel industry and infrastructure depend not only on physical assets, and I might say parenthetically, the Port Authority is driving public-private investment of $30 billion into our airports, but it also depends on operations. And so I'd like to ask you, in the difficult environment in Washington, whether there is support for increased federal funding for staffing at key federal agencies which operate our air traffic and the air infrastructure, and also for investment in technology. We are way behind in terms of our air traffic technology. Is there hope? Is there the ability to get increased federal funding to address those issues?
Rick, thank you for your leadership, and it's a great question. We are in the midst of reauthorizing the FAA, and that will be, one of the more important things that we'll have to do over the next few months, and that's being negotiated, in a bipartisan, bicameral fashion. Right now, we did pass FAA reauthorization out of the House, and that was bipartisan. We're working now with the Senate. We certainly, as House Democrats, are going to continue to push for increased investment in technology and increased investment in our personnel. It's a matter both of safety and, economic productivity, because clearly we have a responsibility to be there for the safety and well-being of the American people as they travel. And when you fall behind from a technology standpoint or fall behind from a personnel standpoint in terms of air traffic controllers or others in the travel infrastructure, TSA agents, we can go through the list, mechanics, then you've got real challenges from a safety perspective, but you also can have adverse consequences in terms of the interconnected economy that we have that does rely on air travel as an incredibly and still very relevant part of commerce. And so the FAA reauthorization bill is actually one of those areas where I do think there's opportunity for increased investment, and I do expect that we're going to get FAA reauthorization, hopefully with some enhancements along the lines of what you've raised over the finish line in the next few months, if not by the end of the year.
Thank you. I know that Teresa Gonzalez, proud ABNY board member, has a question about reproductive rights.
So we're watching as reproductive health progress is being rolled back. What's the plan and what can we do?
Yeah, it's a great question. And, first let me say that we, on our side of the aisle, believe in a woman's freedom to make her own reproductive health care decisions, period, full stop. And we're going to do everything that we can to push back against the extremism, the nationwide abortion ban, the effort to criminalize abortion care, the effort to meddle in a decision that should be between a woman, her family, her doctors, her faith, as these deeply personal reproductive health care decisions are made. Here in New York, under the leadership of Governor Hochul and the legislative leaders, there, of course, will be a constitutional amendment on the ballot to enshrine reproductive freedom in the New York State Constitution, and that will be before the people of New York State in November. That's an incredibly important ballot initiative. We've seen it in other states, but we should take nothing for granted here in New York, and enshrining this protection in the Constitution, will provide some assurances that this right will not be taken away if the pendulum swings, down the road in ways that we may not currently envision, but are always possible in politics. I think it's also important to note that there are many of my colleagues on the other side of the aisle who want to enact a nationwide abortion ban. And that's why reproductive freedom is going to be on the presidential ballot. It's on the House ballot. And we've got several important races here in New York, of course, one of which is going on right now in Long Island and Queens. And it'll be on the Senate ballot as well. I do think that this is an area where it's instructive to know that if you want to clarify an issue before the American people, that you should lean into the value that underlies it. Because we believe that values unite, issues divide. And so if you take the abortion care issue, before Roe v. Wade fell, right, across the nation it was pretty much a 50-50 issue, pro-choice, pro-life. That was a frame that the right-wing conservatives applied to the issue to try to maximize public sentiment on their behalf. But we were very clear when Roe v. Wade fell that we want to take the abortion care issue and anchor it in a value, freedom. And I believe that that is one of the reasons why it has become so powerfully resonant across the country, including in states like Kansas, or most recently in Ohio, and certainly we saw that as a predominant issue both in Virginia and in Kentucky in November. And why? I think it's because it's been anchored in this value of freedom and a woman's freedom to make her own reproductive health care decisions. So I think the most significant thing that we can continue to do, those of us who stand, I believe, on the right side of this issue, is that when we're communicating it, always use the freedom frame, and that gives us the best opportunity, not just to reach people on the progressive side, but certainly moderate, centrist, swing voters who will be important in determining this election and therefore the fate of reproductive freedom moving forward.
Thank you. Leader Jeffries, it's 10 o'clock, and we promise to get you back to Washington. I want to say thank you. And one final thought. You have a room full of people who want to help. Please ask us. We want to be there for New York. We want to be there for you. Thank you for all you do.
Thank you. And we don't have to tell me that twice. Appreciate you.